by, by their grandparents. And so it's it was important to our people because in the 70s our grandparents and we can say our ancestors, um they were fighting for the Boise Valley Treaty, and we hold documents about it. And one of our ancestors' name was Santomico, and if you do the research on the Boise Valley Treaty, that was October 10th, 1864. You'll find Santomico in it. And in the 1970s is when our grandparents were working on getting that treaty recognized. So we have the minutes that were from those meetings, and the things that they talked about, the things that they wanted to do was preserve the land in this general location. Today, this in 2022, we are one of many frontline communities that are indigenous, that are facing these extraction companies. And so I encourage those of those of you who are seeing and watching this, that if you happen to be one of those people who are affected by the extraction industry, don't be afraid to step up and speak, because we're with you, we support you, and we absolutely need to protect our sacred sites and hang on to those, because we are the history before this country. And so that's just the way we feel is the way we should take this. And so that's just the general in a nutshell what the people of Red Mountain have been doing for the past year and a half. And it's an honor to be here, and it's a privilege to be among so many well educated people. And I appreciate everyone coming and listening. And there are ways to get a hold of the people of Red Mountain, so feel free to reach out and ask questions and get the conversation started. Because if we stay silent, to stay silent is to silence our ancestors, and we cannot let that happen. We are the first people of this Turtle Island, and so that's the way we're going to carry it. And if you are one of those indigenous people affected by the extraction industry, protect those sacred sites. And that's all there is to it. And the support will come. And once again, my name is Gary McKinney from the Atsaquadako, Wanua, and Pijat Wawan. Everyone, good morning.
Thanks a lot, Gary. My name is Will Falk. As announced, I'm the attorney for the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony, and was asked to provide the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony's perspective on the Thacker Pass project, and to explain why the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony is involved in litigation against the Bureau of Land Management for permitting the Thacker Pass project. And I guess one of the first things that I'd really like to say is that at this Western Mining Action Network conference, and as you're seeing all these people up here, mining and associated activities affect so many communities around the world, and so many communities, even right here in Nevada. Even just a single project is affecting so many different communities. And the Thacker Pass project is a perfect example of this. If we're just talking about litigation right now, there are multiple different plaintiffs that have actually sued the Bureau of Land Management over this. And I want to bring this up to just show, again, all the different communities that are affected by this. The first person to sue the Bureau of Land Management over this project was a local rancher, a man named Ed Bartell. And he's really concerned about water problems and effects of the Thacker Pass mine to endangered species like Lahontan cutthroat trout and sage grouse. Then there are 4 regional environmental groups that also got involved with similar issues, and that includes the Great Basin Resource Watch, Wildlands Defense, Basin and Range Watch, and the Western Watersheds Project. Then there have been 3 different tribes that have brought legal actions against BLM for this. So you have the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony, the Burns Paiute Tribe of Oregon, and the Winnemucca Indian Colony sought to intervene against BLM in this. And I really want to stress this because oftentimes the media, and I understand that y'all have word counts and y'all have your own jobs and everything. The media oftentimes just focuses on a single aspect of this resistance instead of showing this broad-based coalition. And it's really important that the media shows this broad-based coalition so that people understand just how many people and just how many natural communities are affected by mining and affected by projects like the Thacker Pass project. It really isn't a not in my backyard issue. This is so many people's backyards are affected by this. But to zero in more on the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony, the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony is composed of people of Paiute, Shoshone, and Washoe descent. And I would even expand that out and explain, and this is, I think, a reality for many tribal members. So many members of the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony could be members of tribes across the country based off their their ancestry and the way that people were moved around the country when the American government invaded native land. So the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony is especially concerned with what the Thacker Pass project would do to cultural resources created and lived in by Reno-Sparks Indian Colony ancestors. I think I have about a minute left, but the last point that I really want to make is at the time that something like the September 12th, 1865 massacre happened that Gary mentioned, where somewhere between 30 and 80 Paiute people were surprised, attacked, and murdered by the American government. There was no such thing as the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony. There was no such thing as the Fort McDermott Paiute and Shoshone tribes. There was no such thing as the Winnemucca Indian Colony. All of those were created by the American government as a way to legitimize the invasion of native land. So the people that went to sleep on September 12th, 1865, before they were murdered, they had no idea that their descendants would become members of these different tribes. And so when we're talking about how a project like this affects Native communities, especially, we have to understand the way that Native people were diasporized across America by colonial violence. So there are so many tribes that are affected by the Thacker Pass project, and so many people whose ancestors lived there that still attach cultural and religious significance to the Thacker Pass project area. And I just think that's a really important thing for the media and anyone who's paying attention to this to follow along.
Good morning, everybody. Hehani Washte. My name is Tanya Stans. My Lakota name is Tokiag Lahuniwi. I come from Oglala, South Dakota, on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. We're known as the Wild Oglalas because we're really passionate about our stance and how we protect our sacred lands and our sacred medicine and our people, especially the children, and especially today they call them animals, but they're our relatives. And I advocate for sacred site protection and the revitalization of our culture and our ceremonies. And closer. Okay, sorry. I'll put it closer. So I come from the Black Hills, and on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, we have a uranium mine that we're battling. Back in the I don't know, not that right now it's in a renewal process, but they were operating on a temporary permit for 16 years. And uranium is very radioactive. It will keep radiating for not just a million years, but its half-life is billions with a B, billions of years. So we're dealing with that and how to protect ourselves in our ceremonies, because we use the water in our ceremonies. We sit on the land, we breathe in all the air, you know, our sweat lodges are even, you know, they get nuclear energy for weaponry, and you know they use that, the lithium, the uranium for that energy and that weaponry, because it's very enormous, you know. So when we use that in our ceremonies, it's impacting us on levels that the typical American don't experience. So when you heat up that lodge, it's like you're heating up a nuclear reactor. So that's the advocating that I try to bring, because it's in our ceremonies, and we have yet to advance ourselves in that whole realm of using science to benefit us, you know. So producing these taking a look at our air quality, our soil quality, our water quality, you know, and looking at radiation, you know, and how we absorb those, and then the plants and the medicines. And because we ingest and eat meat, you know, and then our relatives that do not have a voice, that are drinking straight from that pond, you know, and they're living around that. Yesterday we was at the Anaconda site, we saw birds in that water, and they have those floppy machine little things to keep them out of there, but that doesn't help. They're still in there. So, and they don't know. So we have that obligation, because we're the ones that have a voice, to protect our silent relatives. So they're all impacted, and our ceremonies are impacted. So I just bring that message. And back home in the Black Hills, we just like here, we battle a lot of mining companies, and the gold mines are visible from space. You know, when you look at the Black Hills, the northern part of the Black Hills, you can see that, you know, that dry, desolate area where they already desecrated it. It's so big. And there's a Superfund there now. But that, when I look at that area where they have the gold mines, there's, I don't know, I guess I estimated like over 20 of those Superfunds in that little area. And we have yet to deal with that in that state permit process. And that's another thing I like to educate about and advocate about, is the permit process, because a lot of the time our people don't know that permit process, and it should be common knowledge to everybody. And when you try to protect yourself, because this monster that we're all facing, you know, it's all impacting us that way. So if we can advocate and help each other, that's the greatest gift we have for each other. And yes, it's great. I liked how he said yesterday, oh, what was it? We cannot save the environment by destroying the environment, right? So this whole go green, you know, lithium, it's still coming for our sacred lands, and they're gonna take off mountaintops, you know, they're good, and just push like it's so important, it's so rare, we need it right now. But in fact, you know, there's alternative methods. And today, I like to also advocate on migrations. Our people had natural land migrations, and we walk there, and that's called a pilgrimage or a homage. You know, you walk to that sacred site, and we have back home, they do them. We do rides and walks and runs, but it's great difficulty, because we have to go through these land areas where there's a natural trail, but yet we can't go through there because of all the people that live there and won't allow us to pass through there. So that brings us great difficulty on creating these migrations, and we go along the roads, but the road is good, but it's not the trail that we used to walk. So I advocate for that too. And a lot of us deal with these health issues, diabetes and heart disease, but when you do those migrations, it helps us revitalize our health also. So I just want to end on a note that, you know, our way of life, you know, what we were taught back home is that our way of life is the healing that this world needs. So every single one of you, stay strong and keep up with the work that you do. It's very important. Thank you.
Avanga Atira Mesirak. My name is Angel Stickman. I first want to say thank you to W-Man for inviting me, and we are on the Reno-Sparks land. I really appreciate you guys so much. You guys don't know how much this means to me. So I am Enipak in Athabascan. I am from a small village in Alaska. And I am fighting that we in Alaska, but it's frustrating because my tribe wants the AMLA road, but so me and other environmental groups are fighting the AMLA road. And I'm a part of the No AMLA Road Coalition. So a lot of politicians in Alaska are pushing for the AMLA road, and the road in itself is really devastating. They want to build it. The road they want to build will be 211 miles long, and it will be going through the Brooks Range, crossing thousands of rivers. And after they build the road, they want to build a huge mine near our villages. And I'm just worried about the water, our land, the berries, the caribou, the moose, our health. So what's also frustrating is that my native corporation also makes royalties from Red Dog mine, and it's a huge mine in Alaska, and it releases so much chemicals, and there's tribes who are also affected because of Red Dog. So their water's affected, their health, their land, their berries. Yeah, so that's really frustrating. So yeah, again, I would like to say thank you to W-Man for making this, because I don't have a lot of indigenous support. Like I said, my tribe wants the road and mining and stuff. So coming here and having indigenous support is really important to me, and I really appreciate you guys. Yeah, so recently a politician sent a letter to Deb Haaland asking to get the AMLA road built as soon as possible, and she stated that there is strong support from tribes and native corporations, when in fact there are 39 TCC tribes who said that they do not want the road, and more, you know. But yeah, Shungnak is in support of the road, and one more other village. And you know, these mines and my native corporation make people think in rural villages that mining is the only way, when in fact, you know, that's not true. We can do ecotourism, you know, and people who don't want to leave their traditional way of life can work at home. But we also need more broadband, more internet and wireless, you know, out there, because we're so rural. But I feel like those are really good options, because it's so beautiful in my village, man. You guys have to go and visit. Yeah, so Red Dog is really huge, and they want to build 4 to 5 like Red Dogs in my area. Imagine like how that'll affect our river. My people have been living and relying on the Kobuk River for thousands of years, and I feel like that my native corporation, the mines, Trilogy Metals, AMLA Metals, ADA are not giving the right information and giving the true information to rural villages. I really love this campaign to saying no to mining. I really love it. And right now we are asking as many and as much people to sign on into this comment period. BLM opened a comment period, and we only got until November 4. So I really ask you guys to please, you know, write your guys' comments saying that you guys don't want this road. So the email is BLM_AK _AKSO _AMLA road _comments at blm.gov. That was long. Why did they make that so long? And the last thing I want to say is we can't mine ourselves out of mining. Again, I really appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for inviting me.
Good morning. My name is Teresita Kiana. I come from a small community called the Redwater Pond Road, and it's 15 miles northeast of Gallup, New Mexico. Our community deals with 3 Superfund sites. Our community sits right between it within a half-mile radius. And so, like she said, we can't mine our way out of climate change. I just want to tell you a little story of how my community feels that full weight of process that a lot of our industries, a lot of our extractive industries like to say, you know, this is progress. And we're not supposed to feel that brunt of progress in small communities, but my community has to feel that full brunt. And with the exploratory drilling that happened in the 50s and 60s, my great grandmother, Bessie Duncan, she knew that it was wrong, and she actually took out their survey stakes, and so that it would just deter them and make it a little bit harder. It didn't totally work, and her daughter later on, the late Catherine Duncan, continued to oppose the mine and spoke out to the local Navajo Nation government and its officials, and the uranium mining still began, and they began mining for uranium in 1977 all the way to 1982. And in July 16th, 1979, really early in the morning before the sun came up, the earthen dam that was holding a tailings pond failed. And when that failed, 94 million gallons of toxic sludge that was basically the pH balance of battery acid flowed down into the arroyo 100 miles all the way into the Little Colorado. And so with that, it impacted not only our community, but communities all along that arroyo. And so this whole mining operation, it impacted the climate right from the get-go. People want to say, no, the climate was fine. No, once you started with all these extractive industries, you're changing the climate. You're changing the way the earth moves. You're changing the way the water moves. You're changing the way the wind moves. And a lot of people don't understand that right when they started extractive industries, they started changing the climate, and people don't understand that. We started with wars, and with the nuclear age, all that nuclear radiation was put into the air, into the earth, into the land, the water, everywhere. And so climate change started right there. You have to understand that. And so with that nuclear age and who we are as Indigenous people, we are stewards of the land, and we've continued to try to educate our fellow man of how not offering to Mother Earth, giving back and receiving is our balance. And that's something that was never acknowledged. And so now we have a lot of these devastations. We have all these tropical storms, we have earthquakes, we have all these things that are byproducts of the extractive industry, and nobody wants to see that. And so my grandmother, I watched her suffocate because she had pulmonary fibrosis, and that's a byproduct of radiation, breathing in that radiation particulates. And so I just want to know why the industry has not learned from its past of, the whole destruction, and why they can't understand that cleanup and restoration of their past disregards to the land it's harder. Why can't they just stop? And so I just want to leave you with just to keep it in the ground, keep uranium in the ground. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yes, my name is Guy Archibald, and I'm honored to be a guest on Reno-Sparks land, and I'm thankful for WMAN for this opportunity. I am the executive director of the Southeast Alaska Indigenous Transboundary Commission. We were formed by 15 Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian tribes in Southeast Alaska. Southeast Alaska is the world's largest intact temperate rainforest left on Earth. It is literally the lungs of the Earth. It sequesters up to 5% of all the carbon storage of any national forest. It is very much a salmon forest. We get up to 13 feet of rain a year, and this tends to wash the nutrients out of our land and into the ocean. But every spring, it also washes out millions and millions of tiny little salmon fry. And they go out into the ocean and they absorb those nutrients and they bring them back to the forest, to the bears, to the eagles, to the trees. And it feeds those forests. Our rivers that feed this forest come from British Columbia, a false colonial border that divides our people. Our communities are isolated, only accessible by plane or boat. Our communities get up to 80 or 90% of their foods from the forest and the ocean. We have a saying in Southeast Alaska that when the tide goes out, the table is set. British Columbia, in the headwaters of these transboundary rivers, has over a dozen operating and proposed mines. Some of these mines, if built, will be the largest open pit mines in the world. One of them anticipates processing 170,000 tons of ore a day. British Columbia has horrible oversight and mine regulations. These became apparent in 2014 when the Mount Polley Dam catastrophically failed. This dam was less than 20 years old and was considered state-of-the-art technology. BC continues to authorize dams of the same construction to this day. They have a policy of we give them permit first, and then we figure out how to mitigate the impacts later. We recently filed a complaint to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights at the United Nations, demanding meaningful consultation with these mining companies and the BC governments. These transboundary rivers are the largest unroaded rivers left in North America, and they feed our communities. They're our food sovereignty. They allow us to continue our cultural practices and pass these on to our grandchildren. Our ancestors demand that we protect these rivers. We have no choice. We have to stand up and protect these rivers. And I'd like to thank again W-Man for providing this opportunity. And again, Ganesh Chish.
Thank you. Is this okay? Can you hear me okay? Ja, det binnes je Leona Morgan in Shia, Torich eating in Shle, Tanabas ni Bashish Chink, ya Ani that she told me. Good morning. I am from New Mexico. My people are Diné, and I am here at the Western Mining Action Network Biennial Conference to share information about some of the work that I do as an anti-nuclear activist. Today, we heard about the lithium mining, the copper mining, and of course, uranium mining. And the work I've done in the past was really to help stop an in-situ leach uranium mine because of all of the devastating impacts to our water. And so when we talk about mining, all of us, especially here from the Southwest, we're living in a desert arid environment that doesn't have a lot of water. So when we're extracting minerals for whatever, we're also using extensive amounts of water for corporations that should be used by people, by communities. And for a lot of us, water is sacred and water is life. And there was a good quote on the tour, I forget, I wrote it down, but someone said, water is life, and mining, I think, is the death of, I got to find the quote, I'll get it to the media later, but So I'm here to talk about the impacts of mining. So with uranium, we heard about the radioactive waste. Right now, there's nowhere in the country to hold this waste. With uranium mining, that is a very significant problem. But mining all over the United States, we have over 600,000 abandoned uranium mines. So these are mines that were left before there were policies in place to clean them up. And of those 600,000, we have 15,000 at least abandoned uranium mines. On the Navajo Nation, we have what they say, the US EPA says 523 abandoned uranium mines, but the people say at least 2,000 sites that need to be cleaned up. And our part of the country is the only place where the United States is actually doing cleanup of abandoned uranium mines. And the cleanup is very poorly done. And it's very substandard. There's not a lot of information to the public. And this is not the same kind of cleanup that's done in white communities. White communities often have very high level cleanup that is, protective of human health, where our cleanup is substandard, especially in rural areas because of our population density, which is very common among indigenous peoples. And uranium mining happens, we estimate in the world about 75% of the time on indigenous lands. So we are the ones, as it's been said, suffering the brunt of the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry uses our uranium in the United States for United States imperialism to control the rest of the world. So that's one use of uranium, is for nuclear weapons. The other use is for nuclear energy. And nuclear energy right now is being touted as a means to help the climate, just like lithium. And so we need to understand that we can't just transition from one form of energy to another. Nuclear energy is a false solution. Nuclear energy is not going to save the climate. Lithium mining is not going to save the climate. We have to understand we can't just substitute one extractive industry for another, because the same impacts are hurting our people. We're going to be, all of the stories you heard today, contaminating our water, hurting our elders' health, the future generations. We don't know the genetic impacts that we will see from all of these, not just the uranium mining, but as you all know here in Nevada, the fallout from all of the nuclear tests. We have in New Mexico so many nuclear facilities. So the last thing I want to say is, just to kind of put it all together, is what do we do with the waste? And why do we need to keep mining? We don't need to keep mining. We can source these minerals elsewhere. We shouldn't be recycling them. We shouldn't just be, thinking this is a just transition, because we cannot just replace one with the other. We need to reduce our energy consumption. And the other thing is, the work that I do largely in New Mexico is to fight a high-level radioactive waste dump, which is for all the waste from all of the nuclear power plants in the country. There's nowhere to put this waste in the world. And so right now, this is what we're dealing with mine waste as well. There's no repository for uranium. There's no repository for some of these places, the licensed facilities. So what's happening is it's being dumped on Ute people at the White Mesa uranium mill. And so we need to change what we're doing, and we need to figure out how to stop these devastating industries and to clean up, stop making more waste, and to find a better solution to clean it all up. Thank you. I went over time.
Well, get my throat clear. Again, I'm Earl Hatley, and I'm a enrolled member of the Missisquoi Band of Abenaki Nation. I live in Vermont now, but I'm from Oklahoma. And our local organization in Oklahoma, which I represent, is Lead Agency Local Environmental Action Demanded. And we began in 1993 with our organizing around the Tar Creek Superfund site. It's one of 4 Superfund sites in the tri-state mining district of Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma. The Tar Creek site is in the Ottawa County, the northeasternmost county of Oklahoma. The Tri-State Mining District is 2,500 square miles of abandoned lead and zinc mines. The entire 2,500 square miles drains into Ottawa County, Oklahoma, and into our drinking water lake, Grand Lake on the Grand River. And the lake is contaminated. The fish are contaminated, and there's a fish consumption warning on the fish. The Tar Creek site is one of the largest Superfund sites in the country. It was the first site listed on the national priorities list in 1983 when the Superfund program was created. It was listed with Love Canal. Leona mentioned that there's a difference between the cleanup in the white communities and in the native communities. Love Canal's cleaned up, and there's an upper middle class neighborhood now on top of that site. Tar Creek is still festering. In fact, the mine water drainage that's pouring up from the mines underground and onto the surface and into Tar Creek, which began in 1979 and killed all the fish. And the fish are still, there's still no fish in Tar Creek, which pours into the Grand River and then into Grand Lake. 1.5 million gallons of mine water per day flowing into our lake. And if you're familiar with the Gold King mine spill in Colorado, in the Animas River, that total spill before it was stopped was 3 million gallons. So since 1979, every 2 days, 3 million gallons flows down Tar Creek into our lake to this very day. And EPA still does not have a plan for dealing with it. In fact, they have now determined that the entire county is a Superfund site. All of our streams, all the small tributaries, all the streams in Ottawa County are contaminated. The riparian areas, the floodplains, all the plants that we gather are contaminated. And so 10 tribes are in that county, 10 small tribes, and they cannot practice their culture. And so that's my father's culture, Shawnee, Cherokee. My mother was Abenaki from Vermont, Quebec, where I'm living right now. But my father's people, those folks in Ottawa County, they cannot practice their culture as a result. And the EPA is saying it'll be another 30 years before they can clean it up. But at the rate they're going, I think they're underestimating that time. And so they're leaving us with trying to figure all of this out. So mining is forever. Mining changes your community. And what we're finding from the mining companies themselves and their estimates of their impacts to greenhouse gases, 26%. Like you've heard here, we can't mine our way out of climate change. How long would it take for all the new proposals to get to building all these solar and wind chargers? We don't have that much time to deal with our greenhouse gas impacts. 8 years is what the UN is saying. And so we need to do things differently. We need a new focus, not mining, but we need a new focus. Conservation, energy use reduction, recycling of these metals, recycling like Leona was saying as well. So these are things that we need to be focusing on rather than just the rush to mining. Thank you for being here. Believe in me.
I'm Roger Featherstone, Director of the Arizona Mining Reform Coalition. We're a coalition made up of national, state, and tiny little small grassroots groups from all walks of life. We include retired miners, mostly Hispanic, the faith community, indigenous communities, recreational organizations, and even a ghost town. We want to make sure that mining is a net benefit to Arizona if it does happen. We're not anti-mining, but we are anti-stupidity. And these projects that we're facing now in southern Arizona especially are really dumb projects. Arizona is in the middle of a 25-year drought, the worst drought we've had in 1,200 years. We don't have enough water now. And so we have a choice to make. We can either have water for mines or for our communities in our environment. All the projects that I'll talk about briefly are perpetrated by foreign companies from England, Australia, and Canada. They're telling us they want to mine for climate change. They know what's best for us here in the US. Want to talk about Oak Flat, an hour east of Phoenix. It's a holy place. It's also a recreational and ecological haven. It would use as much water as a city of 160,000 people. It would be a very large underground block cave mine proposal. It is a failed experiment. We have protected our communities and protected Oak Flat for 18 years now, and we will see this through until it's stopped. The next one is Rosemont. It's a copper mine south of Tucson. Oak Flat would also be a copper mine. Rosemont is also a sacred area, recreational ecological haven, and it's critical habitat for the jaguar. There's been jaguars sighted within a mile of where they want to build this mine. We've stopped the major proposal in court, but the company Hud Bay from Canada is cobbling together a new variation of the project. But we have solid opposition, and we expect to stop this one as well. I want to talk about two in situ projects for copper. These are operating, but they're not operating well. In situ is the intentional and permanent pollution of groundwater. What you do is you drill a well, inject sulfuric acid into the ground to dissolve the minerals, and then you drill more wells around that first well to pump out the minerals and everything. And like magic, it's supposed to work. The first project is Gunnison, an hour southeast of Tucson, near the town of Dragoon. The second one is Florence, on the banks of the Gila River, within the town of Florence. Both projects have technical problems. It seems that CO2 bubbles are forming when they pump the acid down, and that blocks the flow. So we have one project that said they were going to be the Gunnison project, which touts itself as being the greenest mine in the US, isn't making money. So they're going back to remining an open pit copper mine that has never worked. So in conclusion, we don't have enough water to spare for these projects. We can't mine our way out of climate change, especially for these unreasonable, unworkable, and irresponsible projects. Thank you.
Thanks. So my name is Rodrigue Turgeon. I'm, well, it's an honor for me to be part of this press conference with my friends from all across Turtle Island. I'm the Mining Watch Canada National Program Co-Lead for Eastern Canada. I'm also an environment lawyer and a WMAN steering committee member. I live on Anishinaabe Aki, the unceded territory of Anishinaabe in northern Quebec, Canada, in Val d'Or, or in English, Golden Valley, one of the biggest mining region paradise in North America. So this region is called Abitibi. I'm also the co-spokesperson for the Québec Meilleure Mine coalition that's gathering 30 grassroots organizations, unions, and NGOs and non-for-profit organizations, representing more than 250,000 people living in every region of the province of Quebec. For the last 18 months, as you can see on my screen, the southern Quebec is facing a serious threat, a boom of mining claims that in some regions are going up to 400% for the last 18 months. So at this moment, 142 municipalities representing 500,000 people are calling for a moratorium on mining claims emissions, and they're calling out as well for a revision of the Mining Act, Quebec Mining Act, to grant effective right to say no to local populations, to First Nations and municipalities. In August 2022, so a few months ago, the Quebec Meilleur Coalition commanded a national poll, a survey, and the result shows that 78% of the Québécois and Québécoises, so the people living in the province of Quebec, are supporting the right to say no for local populations. This is major. And meanwhile, free mining regime is still going on in the province of Quebec, like in many places across Canada. So basically, there's no first and prior informed consent, and there's no even consultations for First Nations before the claim emissions. And we know that because this mining boom, as you see in the certain regions, are mostly for graphite and lithium, but in all across the province, the major minerals that it's researched, it's gold. And gold, as you may know, 92% of it is useless on a climate basis. It's mainly for financial, bank, and jewelry interests. So we need to get rid of the greenwashing. We need to offer real alternatives to local affected populations. And we also need to give a right to say no, establish no-go zones. And this right to say no has to go for local affected populations. We need to end the free mining regimes. We need to reduce at the source the mineral extraction. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, everyone, our panelists. I just want to summarize what you heard today, and we'll have a chance for question and answer. And I think Bethany wants to speak also, come up, the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony, which we graciously appreciate use of space here, the land that's on their land. But what you hear is a spectrum across the board. Mining affects people across the board. It affects environments everywhere. And what's happening here in Nevada with Thacker Pass is happening everywhere. It's not just one mine, it's thousands and thousands of them. They call it death by 1,000 cuts. And that's exactly what it is. It's not a solution to climate change. What we need to do, we've heard from our panelists already: recycle, reuse, reduce demand. There are things that we can do right now to address that. Mining is obviously very destructive and disruptive to communities and their environment. Therefore, it only needs to be approached very judiciously and carefully, and that's not what we're seeing. And we're afraid that it's going to get worse with the pressure to increase mining to extract for transition minerals. So this is an example of what happens, and it's happening everywhere. Well, I'll turn it over now. Bethany, did you want to? Are we ready for questions? Yeah. So if anyone, any of the journalists have questions for our panelists, this is a good time.
I have a question. Can you hear me? My name is Katie Spence. I'm from the Epic Times. I'm wondering if you feel that mining is being driven not by environmental policies and a desire to transition to more green energy, but for money, for profits. And I open that to everyone.
Who wants to address that one? You want to go first?
These are international mining corporations. They're in business for one reason and one reason only: to make money. And so this is pure utter greenwashing. saying that, oh, we're going to save your climate. We're going to come down from on high, this wonderful international corporation, and we're going to save you lowly beings. And but no, it's money, pure and simple. That's it.
This is true. It is about the money. The mining companies are seeing an opening, boom, because of the need to transition to renewable energy. And it would be nice if we had renewable energy to transition to, but solar, wind, and battery storage is dependent upon mining as they're configured now. We need time to transition this technology to where it's not so dependent upon these minerals. Also to build out a recycling and industry so that we can begin recycling what's already been mined. This is an approach that's being taken up by Europe. And so this is what one of the things that we're pushing for. But what we're seeing right now is the impacts of the lobbying by the mining industry on the politicians, on the Biden and Trudeau administrations, and putting money into their campaigns, putting money into the heavy lobbying that's pushing for more mines in order to build out this industry, when there's so much more that we actually need to do in order to get to our climate goals. And so this is not the way to get to our climate goals. This is a way to get to their bank account goals. And that's what we're dealing with.
Just a question. I'll leave you with a question. So if it was not for profit, for money, would we witness pollution, violations of human rights? Would we mine useless metals like gold? That's my question. So.
And then real quick, guy, and then we'll go on to the question.
Yes, mining companies, as Roger pointed out, actually have a legal fiduciary duty to maximize profits for their shareholders. They hide behind corporate structure. Corporations are a human construct designed to remove people from the consequences of their decision making. People who face no risk should not be making decisions for other people's communities.
I came to my first WMAN conference in 2007, and I just want to repeat a quote I heard from a Western Shoshone elder, Carrie Dan, and she said, "We cannot eat money." And so she went on to talk about the permanent impacts to our ecosystems, our sustenance, our cultural way of life, our future generations, all from the impacts of mining. And so I just want to repeat what Carrie Dan said. We cannot eat money.
Yes, another question. Obviously, a lot of these policies are driven by industrialists who have that money-making goal in mind and not in the public interest. So that's an important point. No. Okay, other questions from journal media?
I have another question. Again, Katie Spence from the Epic Times, just not trying to dominate, but you mentioned lobbying the government for these mines. Which companies, if you know, are the most active with lobbying? And do you feel they're targeting Republicans and Democrats, or are they just targeting Democrats because they are pushing the environmental policies?
Lobbying question. Who wants to address that one?
I'm not going to name names of companies, but what I'm seeing is heavy lobbying on both sides of the aisle. Certainly, they're lobbying the Biden administration because they want that buy-in, and that's where we've already seen the Defense Production Act and the subsidies that the Biden administration is handing out to the mining companies. That's what they lobbied for, and that's what they got. Joe Manchin from West Virginia was the big spearhead for that, but we also see the Republican Party is big on mining, big on fossil fuels, and the Biden administration is going with that as well. We see a forked tongue from the Biden administration. One tongue, one fork is environmental justice. The other fork is mining and fossil fuels. And we see him going in both directions. And that one direction of extraction is being pushed by the Republican Party and fostered by a couple of senators in the Democratic Party. And Biden is going along with that. So it's both parties together that are going along with this extraction, and they're not slowing down on fossil fuels either. So we see both happening at the same time, while on the other hand, we're getting all these appeasements on environmental justice, but we don't really see anything coming from that.
Anybody else in that one? Certainly here in Nevada, we see it all. The mining industry has been very influential in all our politics here in Nevada and these decisions. And it's something that we have to address locally for the people to have a voice and not just the mining industry. Other questions?
I have another question. Again, Katie Spence from the Epic Times. You mentioned with Thacker Pass that they pushed through the permits in an expedited manner. Can you expound on that a little bit, what you saw and what's happening?
So we want to talk to that one? Speak to it also.
Yeah, so the Thacker Pass project in particular was fast-tracked under a Trump-era secretarial order that required or mandated that the local BLM office responsible for handling the project complete the whole NEPA process in less than a year. Typically, projects like this, on average, take between 3.5 and 4 years, and that meant that we've now seen through the lawsuit, through suing the Bureau of Land Management, one of the things that happens in these cases, in fact, the whole body of evidence, so to speak, that these cases turn on is called the administrative record. This is all the documentation that the government puts together to justify the decisions that they make for these projects. We've now seen that administrative record, and it is chock full of emails between BLM employees complaining about how this process was happening way too fast, that they couldn't get their responsibilities fulfilled, that they could not complete all the scientific studies, all the cultural resources studies, and so they necessarily cut a lot of corners in this permitting process. But I think what's really interesting, especially building off of your last question, was President Biden did revoke that Trump-era secretarial order with a lot of fanfare when he first took office. And then about a year later, he very quietly reinstated those same deadlines, those same pressures under the Defense Production Act. This is something that's going to be happening to every community. The federal government is going to want to rush these projects, and rushing the projects has two benefits. One, it limits the public's knowledge, the amount of time that the public has to understand these projects, to respond to these projects, to organize resistance to these projects is necessarily undermined when you rush the projects. And I think this is a very intentional move to make sure that these mines get in. And it's something that as a movement, we're going to have to really figure out how to push back on. I'd love to hear John's thoughts on that.
And Gary, do you want to say anything about how the community left out?
Because the Thacker Pass mine was fast-tracked, it cut out the consultation process, and us being one of 28 of the tribes here in Nevada, so there should have been a lot more people at the table, culturally, tribally, a lot more people involved in the consultation process, and so it was totally unfair for the indigenous community to to hear about this being fast tracked when we know that there's medicines out there, when we know that water is life, and when we know that there's eagles out there, and those are things that are important to us. And so if the consultation process was present, the people in this country may have heard about a lot more than what they have already heard about. And so, yeah, that's what I would want to add to it. Thank you.
And I'll just add a little bit. Our organization, Great Basin Resource Watch, was also involved in litigation, as Will mentioned earlier. And I've been doing this mining work since 2006. And the Thacker Pass environmental impact statement was one of the worst I've seen. When we saw that and saw all the things that were left out and incorrectly done, we knew we had to go to court. This is no way to permit a mine. This is not an example of how we should be doing mining. In fact, we should be more careful than we ever have been. What Gary is talking about, what Will is talking about, things left out of the EIS. Part of the reason that people at Red Mountain formed is because of finding out, people in their community were finding about the mine late, after the EIS was already signed. That's all that information, all the information they've talked about with the massacre and what has happened out there, that should have been in the environmental impact statement. Another thing I'll mention also is that the state of Nevada and the federal government have permitted 2 different mine plans. The federal government permitted a portion of the mine plan that allowed it to go below the water table. The state of Nevada's permit says no. So there's a major disconnect in the information there. The federal government should never have permitted that. They obviously weren't communicating with the state. They didn't get their ducks together on that one, and neither did the mining company. They submitted a submission plan, a mitigation plan on going below the water table, which would result in groundwater contamination that was inadequate. And the state recognized that, and we recognized it. Another reason we're suing in court. I could go on with many other deficiencies in this EIS process, including the fact that they did the process during the height of COVID. They should have paused the process. They should have said, okay, we cannot communicate with the communities. An important aspect of the National Environmental Policy Act is community engagement. That's a key aspect, that people are able to understand the full consequences of a mine plan. That did not happen in this case. It doesn't happen in a lot of cases, but it really didn't happen in this case. And if you ask the mining, if they say, oh, we couldn't have paused the process, that's baloney. Because Nevada Gold Mines requested exactly the same thing in 2000 on the Long Canyon mine, and they did pause the process. So it could have been done. So it's baloney if they say they couldn't be. I'll stop there, see if there's any more questions.
Katie Spence with the Epic Times again. Sorry, could you, this is for all tribal members, could you give us examples of what type of cultural ceremonies will be impacted by these mines? More of a personal perspective.
You want to start, Gary, or someone else, or whoever?
Oh, go ahead. Thank you. This is Tanya Stans from Oglala, South Dakota. I just want to say that all of them are impacted. You know, they try to separate us. They try to divide and conquer us, but a lot of the indigenous people around the world have the same similar ceremonial practices. So like where I come from, it starts from birth, and it starts before birth, and how you bring a child into this world, you know, and how we were doing our laboring and delivering, you know, it was on the ground. That was a ceremony. And bringing the child into in this world, you know, we have that history, and we know we travel back and forth along the Milky Way. So when we come into the earth, we know where we're coming. And where I come from, the Black Hills looks like a heart, and that's how we know how to find our home, coming from the stars, coming from the universe. And that gets into the highest levels of, you know, science, you know, with the stars. But we have those histories, and we tie ourselves to those all our lives. And so how we bring our children into the world, it starts right there, and it's in the placenta. You know, when you're feeding your baby, you know, as a woman, you're giving your baby nutrients when the baby's in your body. So you're impacting the child way before the child even came out into the world. So these are very impacting. That's just the start. Now we go into our ceremonies with the going, and it goes throughout our life. So womanhood, manhood, you know, I guess Jews kind of have that, what is it? Their ceremonies there too. So we have those too. And then we go into the rest of our lives. And one of our ceremonies is a adoption ceremony. It's called a hunkah. And so that's to keep our wellness within our families holistic and very kinship oriented. You know, we have purpose and roles with each other to help each other along our lives. So these are ceremonies all through our life and then into our death, you know, and there's a ceremony for that, and we practice that. So each ceremony is impacted. And then we go into like the sweat lodge and how we, you know, again, we are experiencing these impacts on higher rates that normal Americans don't experience because we practice our ceremonies. And I really want to commend Earl and his, he did a science research study on the Superfund of the birds in their Superfund, and their feathers were impacted. So here we are using, each tribe has feathers, and here we are fanning and using our feathers, and they have that contamination, that radiation on them, you know. So we're great in our traditional foods. You know, when we go into our ceremonies, we have traditional foods, and we have to use those since time immemorial, and those are impacted. So when we're ingesting those, the air quality, water quality, the soil quality, everything is impacted. I could go on even more, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So in Alaska, in my village of Shungnak, so because of you know, boarding schools, our people were told not to do stuff or speak their language or, you know, do all that stuff. So we don't have much ceremonials today, but we do in people in rural villages, and my village rely heavily on fish, caribou, moose, berries, and mining will affect all that. And I also wanted to add something about greed, because that question was asked before. So Native corporations in Alaska, I feel like, you know, don't help their people. When INCSA was passed, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, I felt like that was a way to steal our land, you know, and, you know, do so many other things. So I feel like the Native corporations aren't even helping their shareholders who are, you know, who are tribal members, but they're also shareholders of the Native corporations, you know, at least just like one check a year, you know. But I feel like they want the mines because they want to support themselves who work for the Native corporation, you know. They just, I feel like that's what they want to do, to just help support themselves and not the people who live in the you know, who live in the villages.
I just want to point out that this question is kind of a tactic that's used by corporations to say, well, what part of the earth is sacred? Or what, can you point to the sacred element so we don't impact it? Which is not correct. This is not what we're trying to say. It's everything. Mother Earth is sacred as a whole. Water is life. We are water. Our bodies are water. We cannot separate ourselves from the sacred. So for someone to ask us, tell us, where is this sacred site, or tell us what ceremony is impacted, that is to give away our traditions and to give away our indigenous knowledge. And that is for us, and for us to hold, and for our ancestors and for our children. It is not something to put in the media. It is not something to put in a mining application. When we say this is sacred, it's everything. There's no imaginary boundary that says this is sacred and this is not sacred. it's everything, as Tanya said. So this question in itself is false or incorrect. I have to say this is not the way that we operate as Indigenous people, to delineate and to separate the sacred from the non-sacred. And this is what our message is. We're trying to say everything, all life is sacred, and we must stop all mining. It doesn't just affect the places that we hold our traditional doings, our medicines. It's also the timing. If the world is being impacted so much, so we can't say it's impacting this ceremony or that. If a ceremony is based on the weather or the snow on the mountain, or the ground needs to be dry, or we need this plant and that plant no longer grows, or the snow is not coming at the right time, it's everything that's being impacted. We can't separate it.
I just wanted to add that on top of what Leona just said, this has impacted our constitutional right to just be the people that we are. And so that's just something that I want to leave you guys with.
Thank you, relatives, for mentioning what you did. You know, to us, life is sacred, as you heard. And if I was to give you an idea of what that actually means, you know, when we've heard from our relatives here, that when, you know, when a mother is expecting, when she's carrying a baby, you know, what's the first thing when the water breaks, and that, you know, that's the first sign that, hey, life is on its way. And when that water touches the ground, you know, that is the connection right there. That what we cannot describe, that is the English word for being sacred. And you know, if nail it to the wall, you know, when you go walk out into the desert, the first thing that you want is water. Or when they send astronauts up to Mars, what's the first thing they look for? Is water. And you know, we don't know why, but you know, life is sacred itself, and that's what we're saying, you know. Thank you.
Yes, and I also want to thank everyone, all of our relatives, for their comments. In our area in Oklahoma, where the groundwater of most of the entire county is contaminated, our ceremonies use water. They use medicine plants. And like I've described, medicine plants are contaminated and the water is contaminated. So the springs are contaminated, and our our medicine people, our elders, go to the springs to get the water for the healing ceremonies. Well, if the water is contaminated, our ceremonies are impacted. So it's water, it's the plants. That's our life. That's our healing. And if that's all contaminated, if that's all impacted, then our ceremonies are impacted.
Thank you. I think we'll close the question and answer on that note. That was a good closing. Thank you. I'd like to thank all our panelists for participating. We appreciate it very much. Thank WMAN, thank Reno-Sparks Indian Colony coordination, and all the journalists that have come as well. I think Bethany has some closing, and then I believe people can be available afterwards for interviews, and some folks maybe can provide phone numbers. It's up to you all. Bethany, thank you very much.
Bija manahu ha'u inatnia Bethany Sam na Colville Weta na Hunk Papa Dakota or Wichina Dakota na Kudzedeka Onavi Takota na Washishu na Supani. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bethany Sam. I'm the Public Information Officer for Reno-Sparks Indian Colony. I'm also the chairperson for Nevada's Indian Territory, which is a tourism marketing arm for the entire state. My tribes are Wichina Dakota, which is a band off of Hunk Papa and closely related to Sitting Bull. I'm actually an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe.
but I grew up here in our Numa country or homelands. I'm also Kutsutka Paiute from Mono Lake, Yosemite area, grew up in Colville, California. I'm Washoe and also Mexican. And I'm just so proud and honored that Reno-Sparks Indian Colony was able to be a part of these conversations. Michonne Eben help organizing, and Will, everyone here to elevate our voices. I know we're always saying as Indigenous people, we want our voices to be heard. We want America to know who we are and our struggles and where we are now with our healing. And, our ancestors, we all know this, our ancestors 7 generations ago prayed for us here living today. And now it's our turn to step up and pray for these next 7 generations. And this is a part of, the mining, extraction, oil, all these things that come into our land, American and these borders and, whatnot. And so it's just awesome to know that even though all the struggles and historical trauma that we've been through, that we're still gathered here today to be able to come together, pray together, and be advocates for our sacred lands, our sacred Mother Earth. And, Reno-Sparks Indian Colony, along with People of Red Mountain, all of our allies and advocates, have helped us to really understand, I guess, what's going on with our lands, and that, we're still here, even through boarding schools, assimilation, colonization, that our elders were able to hold on to ceremonies that reconnect us to our areas. And the main thing that I think through this conference and what Reno-Sparks Indian Colony has been saying throughout this entire litigation with the Nevada lithium mines is to say we need to change the mining law of 1872, which was meant to take away our sacred lands or take our lands away from us for extraction. For the benefit of our world today, we all, the world is materialistic. We are thrive through ego, pride, and we as Native people understand that's not the way of life, that, we have to rethink and decolonize our minds to go back to the way our Creator made us to be as humans here together. And so, if we could say anything, we need that mining law to change, and we need better consultation, and we need the world to understand who we are as Native people, and that traditional values is what's going to hold us together. The U.S. Constitution was based off of the Iroquois Nation's process of how they did their, how they controlled their community, or how we lived as people. And so, there's a lot of hypocrisy through the colonization, thinking that we didn't know who we were, but we do, and we know that connection, that spiritual connection. And so we need, the world and just us as humans moving forward to save Mother Earth, what we have here right now, and learn from Indigenous knowledge. And so, that's the one thing we want to get out of this is we all have to tell our senators, congressmen, our government to say, change that law so we can have a voice and we can have a say so what happens to this earth. And so I just want to thank all of you for being here to advance our voice, enhance it, and good work. And again, thank you for coming to the Reno-Sparks Indian Colony in our territories here. Pijait you.
Yeah. Here's the mic. Here's the mic.
No problem, sir. You saved this.
Here's the mic.
No problem, sir. Save this.
Here's the mic.
No problem, sir. Save this.
Here's the mic.
No